Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the South Africa podcast. You're listening to myself, Ivan Wolf here. We have with us a very special guest and special guests who've joined us this evening in Ash and Ash, but Ash Coyote and Ash Eagle. You guys are more than welcome to say hello.
Hi.
Hello there.
And then, of course, our co-host in Scratch.
Yo.
Right. And so if you've been living under a rock for the last couple of months, you guys have been working on a massive project that has been it's taken you how long to get to where we currently are? Just pre-production, pre-release?
That depends on where you consider the starting point to be, because we made the series back in 2018, and the film we kind of pitched and kickstarted March of last year. So this film has been in production for like a year and a couple months.
Mhm. And then with all of that information, where exactly, so when you started the entire project, what was the end goal? What did you want to sort of achieve by the end of it?
If I may, just
Yeah.
one
Go.
step back quick. For the uninitiated, what is the name of this project?
Oh, sorry, that's a good point. So the name of our film is The Fandom. I know, super creative name, right? But it basically covers the furry fandom in its entirety, or tries to. We're trying to address each like the groups and individuals and interests within the community. It started as a web series and is now coming out as a feature film of the same name, slightly different subject matter.
Right. So
That's right.
Go.
Oh, so while the series will take more time to focus on a specific topics or themes within the furry fandom, and each episode focuses on one of those ideas, the film itself is a much broader look at a very specific topic, which is the origins and history of the furry fandom.
Okay. And when we're talking about origins and history, we're talking about as far back as, because I know that there have been a couple of series, or at least a couple of attempts at explaining how the sort of fandom itself came to be. I know that what was it? There's been a series that goes as far back as ancient Egypt and talks about fursonas from there, and sort of the movement through history. Like, what is your sort of major focus here? Is it just modern furry fandoms or furry sort of fandom content? Are we talking about the differences in countries? Yeah, go.
Yeah.
So really what we're looking at here is what we would consider the birth of the furry fandom as we know it today. So where our origins came from, we do touch on some of the historical references, but of course, furry is a very modern concept for a very dynamic idea. Like this idea has existed throughout time. Like anthropomorphic animals and the like. But furry is really the marker for when furry starts is when it goes from just being liking anthropomorphic characters to becoming a community of individuals that kind of contribute to this together.
Right. One of the things that we discovered early on is that there was this kind of coalescing moment where people realize, oh, I'm not alone. There's other people who have the same passion and interest in as I do. And when this group starts to have a name, that's kind of the moment that we sort of enter into this community with our film. We kind of look a little bit at the how that came to be, but that's kind of generally where we get started. So I would say is roughly the late 70s.
Yeah, I mean, and that obviously involves the name escapes me now, and we've had him on the podcast. at
Fred
one
Patton.
point. Fred Patton, yeah. I'm not sure if you're familiar.
We are.
Yes.
He's passed away.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and
Yeah.
that was sort of I think when we had that interview with Fred, it was actually quite interesting because when we're looking at the history of the fandom itself, and I mean Fred went as far back as the 1970s and 60s, and about the sci-fi sort of perspectives that came out from things like that. I mean, D&D has a very sort of heavy connection to what we're currently talking about when it comes to this idea of role playing particular um, characters and things like that. And I want to sort of segue into sort of the aspects that we're looking at when it comes to the fandom and when it comes to your documentary. Like, would there be sort of points where you are looking at the sort of, I guess, the minutia of what one could consider to be a furry?
Yes and no. I think that we give a pretty clear definition, at least, of what furry is, at least as it is today, right? And how we kind of explore and get to that point is, I mean, it's less focused on like, oh, so and so decided furry is the name of, you know, this community, and that's just what we're going to go with. No, it's more focused on the individuals that kind of came up and kind of pushed it to that point. So take take individuals like Steve Galacci, for example, who created Albedo, and um, Reed Waller, who did Omaha the Cat Dancer and stuff. So early works that eventually became hallmarks of the fandom that really helped to elevate it and build the community back in the 70s and 80s.
Right. So, and as we sort of move through time, and I mean, I know that, like, what's the word? Other documentaries that have been out there tended to be either, what's the word? What makes your documentary different from the way that documentaries have been released over the last couple of years?
What do you mean, like
Yeah.
like why our release is different? Or are you asking like what makes our documentary different overall?
Yeah. What
Sorry.
makes it unique to, say, some of the other ones that are out there already? Like, what was the sort of reasoning behind wanting to do this?
Okay, so I'll answer, and then I think Ash has a even better perspective on this one. So mine will be short. I think what really sets us apart with this particular film from the other documentaries that have come out. Mind you, we have had one or two that have been created from within the fandom. So, you know, access being that, you know, like they could get in front of the right people to talk and interview. But as far as our project goes, really what we decided to do was focus in on the history of our community in a way that kind of elevates the concept of furry. It addresses all the questions that, you know, the quote unquote normies might have. You know, what is furry? Is it just a sex thing? You know, like where did this come from? Why does this exist? And it sets it also against the contemporary community. So we get to see where we started and where we are today. We try not to focus too much on like the controversies, though we do touch on some very dynamic and interesting personalities through the film, and some of their, you know, conflicts that arise from that, egos being the way that they are. But I mean, generally speaking, I think we really tried to just create a piece that was different.
Yeah, if I can jump in on that, I think a lot of the films that I've seen that relate to the fandom, even works that I've worked on in the past, have had a lot to do with the explaining the what, like what is this thing, but not a lot of them explain like the why and like the I think the driving passions for like how this community got organized in the first place, where it started as kind of sort of like a grassroots kind of feel, where it was just a group of people who said like this is something that we care enough about to like attempt to make our own like convention around it and see if like that can actually take off. And it's like the risks they took and like the challenges that they faced are what sort of set the groundworks for this scene that is the fandom as we know it today. And when Ash initially approached me with the idea of this film, I was thinking to myself, well, you know, I really don't know that much about our history. There have been like attempts to like try to trace certain things back, but in terms of like a digestible like featured kind of like experience that I haven't seen this explored before. And because we are members of the community itself, we were fortunate to have the access to track down some of the founding members of our community, and they were willing to speak with us because we are members of the fandom. They felt that they could trust us, and we were just really honored to be able to share their stories to show how this whole thing got going. Because I think a lot of our contemporary furries just don't know the story. I think many people assume that the fandom got started maybe like in the late 90s or kind of like around like the internet era, but the truth is there were many conventions or many events, like gatherings of people at room parties at science fiction conventions like years before that, and that's just not talked about very often. So we're hoping to bring a lot of that to the surface using incredible archival footage that we were able to get from many furries who basically documented almost everything. So we were not only able to explore these things, but we're able to show a lot of it too.
That's really, really good, because I mean, like, those are things that I think we should be very interested in. If we don't, what's the word? If we can't look at our history in one way or another without sort of like losing anything. And I mean, I think that was something that was very important, because I mean, we sort of touched on Fred Patton, for instance, and the fact of the matter is that losing him as what could almost have been considered to be a keystone to sort of our history, and that sort of connecting point, it's pretty devastating, honestly. Especially
It is. It is.
Go.
Oh, sorry. It's interesting that you should mention that, because that was literally the inspiration behind the project. Not just Fred Patton, but like Robert Hill.
Yeah.
One of the first fursuiters passed away too. My husband Chip, who was the producer on this project, has been in the fandom since 1991, and he was really the kind of driving force that kind of pushed this all forward, because our history really hasn't been documented. Not in like a way in which people can like easily see and understand. I know Fred Patton wrote his book, which was pretty much like a dictionary of events and stuff, chronological and whatnot. And we looked through that.
Oh yeah, it was a huge resource for us as we were like fact checking and putting this together.
Yes, it was massive, and then of course Joe Strike's book Furry Nation,
yes,
was another point of discussion, which he's in the film actually. But it's that idea that we don't want to lose our history. This is an important history in the fact that this community has stayed around for as long as it has. It's been as dynamic as it has been. It's been a safe space for LGBTs and expression. We need to preserve that so people know.
And I mean, like, while you, the two of you were, or just I guess you and your entire crew were sort of moving through like all of these little aspects of what the furry fandom was about, was there anything that sort of openly surprised you as to what you actually initially knew about the fandom, and then sort of going and delving into this? Is there anything that you sort of picked up on and going like, oh wait, that's actually pretty interesting? Is there anything like that sort of happens throughout the documentary?
I mean, for me, there's
first on this.
Oh, thank you. There's certainly revelations all the time as we were excuse me, all the time as we were listening to the stories that like our founding members were sharing with us. I was blown away time and time again by things that I was learning, particularly like the overlap between our community and other communities really fascinated me. You mentioned Fred Patton many times, and he was involved with helping establish one of the very first anime fan clubs in the United States, which, as we explore, this has some significant overlap with the same groups that eventually get the furry community and scene kind of up and running as well. And it was interesting for me to learn that there was like a deep connection between the two, particularly because having been someone who attended anime conventions first, I always assumed that anime like scene was like this big thing that came before furry, but there's actually a lot of furry involvement in bringing the awareness of anime to the United States and popularizing it. They helped, their club helped by showing some of the first like dubbed or I think it was like fan dubbed anime that was like available at the time, and that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, sorry, I blacked out there for a couple of seconds.
What?
That was me. No.
Oh, jeez.
I'm
I'm so sorry.
He does that from time to time.
Just you're gone.
You got me ranting about history, and then I was just so.
No, I'm not saying that was bad. Like, I absolutely enjoy, like, for me especially, because the way that the way that the fandom itself, it's literally one of the reasons why we sort of have the podcast as it is. Always listening to these kinds of stories about where this kind of information came from, and like what I'd also like to do right now is maybe just sort of speak about your own backgrounding individually, as to why this would have been such an important project for both of you, if that's okay. So I mean, we can go one for one. We can go Ash for Ash.
Ash for Ash. Oh boy.
So Ash, would you like to go first?
Sure. So the I guess this is a two-part question. One, our own personal background, and two, why this is important. Is that correct?
Yeah, we can go with that. Yeah.
Okay. So I have been in the film industry for roughly 13 years. This is my first major project, kind of coming back to it. I took a break because I transitioned and I lost a lot of my work and clients. So this is kind of my stepping back into the role of filmmaker for a project. This project is important to me because this community gave me life. It gave me a second chance. It gave me the opportunity to express myself in ways that I never really was able to in the outside world. I mean, if you're aware of like my channel and my content and stuff, I do discuss a lot about how being furry and being trans kind of overlapped, and how I was able to use that to help sort out my own identity and really kind of find myself. So when I initially approached this project, I was inspired by you'd mentioned other documentaries, so I was inspired by the CNN documentary that came out in 2018, and I'd watched it literally just before that MFF. And I was like, they missed so much. We need to kind of cover that. And I'd been looking to try and pick up my camera again and do another project, and I just kind of rolled out there, shot for 3 days, interviewed everybody that would agree to go on camera, and that was the series. And it just gave me so much more life. And meeting Ash also like kind of helped rekindle my own artistic expression. It helped bring me back to the world of film, and I really love that, appreciate that, and I'm very thankful to know Ash and have him as a part of the project and a part of our lives. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you, Ash. I'm very much honored to have you as a part of my life as well.
Thank you.
So I am only about like 9 years or so into the film industry. I got my start when I was working out in Ohio, which is where I grew up. And then I moved out to California several years ago, and I have been working out there ever since as a documentary editor. I did a lot of assistant editing work for many years. The last major project that I worked on as an assistant was American Factory. And this was my first time cutting a feature-length film of this scale from like the ground up. So for me, it was an important milestone in my own career for that reason. But then also, I mean, kind of to touch on certain things that Ash was saying, the fandom means a lot to me personally. I like to take on projects that I think, I don't know, have something to say to them, and I really think that there's a lot going on here that people don't like understand about like our community. I think it's really easy to kind of, you know, write it off as something that's just kind of like, oh, it's fun, it's just people in costumes or whatever. But I think there's a much more deeper connection that people don't understand outside the community, and I wanted to try to help bring that awareness to them. Like for me, I was kind of like a shy, sheltered kid, and the fandom, in many ways, gave me a voice. I mean, even like the simple act of having a persona is basically giving you permission to talk about yourself in a sense. I mean, you don't necessarily have to create your persona to be an accurate representation of you, but if you do, and people ask about your character, it's kind of like they're asking about you, and it's like this beautiful way of kind of like testing out identity and seeing like what fits. And I think that's really, really powerful. And I think that's a component that people don't really think about when they express like what the fandom like does for people. And that's something that we try to do in our film, is say like, this is like the connection that individuals like have to this character, to this community, to the sense of belonging, of feeling included, feeling safe, and being able to express themselves, and like why all that's important. And then also like the potential obstacles that can come and threaten those sorts of things, and why it's important to stick together as a community to preserve those types of feelings and safe spaces for us. So being able to work on a film like this meant a lot to me.
I really hear that, and I think it is terrifyingly important work that you guys are doing. It's something that I think, like we've been saying, I think throughout the entire thing here is that like we do need to have more of these conversations. Anything else, and I know that when it comes to something like say a podcast or any kind of what is it the people who are looking at digging up positivity. Scratch. We had a man who was. I'm terrible with names, by the way. So Ash and Ash is actually great for me.
Yeah,
we made it just for you.
the otter.
Yeah.
What was his name? I'm completely spacing out now.
That's exactly how it's happening for me right now. Hooray.
Are they a YouTuber?
Yeah.
Is it like Tiberius or something like that?
No, it's.
I'll look it up.
Yeah, I'm like scrolling through my contacts here, and I can't find it.
We'll see what happens.
I'd like to BLM and how that should be sort of one of our major foci here within the fandom as well. And I know that we also looked at BLM 2 weeks ago. And when it comes to like within the pretty almost we probably is because we've been talking around on things like representativity, looking at things like, safe spaces. The fandom itself has always been, and many people have said this, at least in some of the conversations that I've had, that the fandom's almost always been at the forefront of acceptance. And then, of course, in that same sense, also cutting out things that would be considered to be negative. It's sort of self-policing. Are those things that I think you took note of when you were doing sort of like all of the research and looking at all of this kind of information, that we're both a safe space for people who would be considered to be vulnerable within other parts of the societies that we're sort of mingle with, while also being, self-policing? Is that something?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I would say that's actually a significant part of our framework of exploring the fandom, is like the way that we have established ourselves, but then also the ways in which the fandom has had these like narratives and questioned its own narratives. about like how do we represent our own identities, particularly when the media got, the non-furry media got involved in like the 2000s with things like Vanity Fair and CSI and that kind of thing. Those spurred on a lot of questions about like how do we want to present ourselves to the public.
Well,
So
and,
I think
even kind of building off of that, we're talking about, you know, like a community that is predominantly LGBT, right?
exactly.
We have almost 80% of the members of our community are LGBT. 12% are trans. I mean, those kind of numbers don't exist out in the real world, right? You know, like that's, what is the statistic? Like it's like 1% or something like that of the population is LGBT, or is it 10%? I forget, but
I think it's of like of the U.S. Population approximately like up to like 1%, but it's
yeah,
not even a full percent.
yeah, it's not a
Self-identified.
very significant number. Yeah, and like we are, you know, a community that is predominantly LGBT, which, you know, is arguably a minority in our country, and you know it's definitely, it's factored into everything that we did in this film. You know, like that's a major aspect of it.
But also with the inclusivity of the fandom has brought in like its own set of complications. I think someone in the film says something to the effect of like we could all sit around and discuss like Daffy Duck, but like, you know, but the fandom also attracts every stripe of like the political spectrum. So there's different ideologies that are united because of this like separate common interest, but now they are in the same room and have to you know, figure out how to negotiate that. And we see that
Yeah,
play out at different times, I think, in our fandom and then also in our film.
yeah, especially as of late with political ideology being kind of the major flashpoint that we're dealing with. We do discuss some of the alt-right movement or in the fandom and how it's affected us as, you know, the community that we are. We definitely touch on a lot in this project.
I think also just as filmmakers, it's important to look at your film as like a kind of a cultural mirror. Like, it's like what is this film like saying about like the cultural zeitgeist right now, and like how we like know the world and understand the world, and one of the things that is important right now is politics, and that's certainly part like politics are life, and even in things simple as this fandom, I think like our film shows like how like different ideologies and opinions can create rifts, and then hopefully what we stress is that coming together and trying to look past differences and finding ways to like stay united and to look out for one another actually can foster like these amazingly positive creative environments, and hopefully our film is kind of a beacon for that kind of like forward progression.
No, I completely believe that, and I think I'm going to say I think one more time, but one of the one of the major things that, and it's literally, I mean, like, what's it? I think, there we go. So we have 4 people in chat currently, and I think I'm going to hook on that for a couple of seconds, but the collective experience within the fandom is already what 50 years just between the 4 of us, probably a bit more than that. I mean, like Scratch and I have been around since 2000 and
Early.
2000 and early, 2004,
5 around there, yeah.
2004 to 5. So it's like we definitely have, I think, a late middle-aged person sitting here just by experience within the fandom itself. And one of the most interesting things is that, like, whereas when you're looking at anime, say fandoms and a couple of other fandoms, you find that and maybe also within the brony fandom, you'll find that the average age dies off after 26. But within the sort of furry fandom itself, you'll find large amounts of people at the ages of 40, 50, 60 and up who have been with the fandom for long enough to both be, I guess, sometimes directional pointers, and then people that we admire as storytellers, say like Uncle Kage, who, thank goodness they're still with us, kind of like things that we can have these moments where we can sit down and listen and go like, wow, okay, that happened back then. And it's definitely sort of good to be able to still have that connection, because I mean, if you look at the Brony fandom, it's a lot more broken as an ideology, that there's no sort of like silver lining between, I think, generational parts of of the fandom itself, obviously because it's technically young, but only in as much as that we can probably still look back and go like, okay, cool, there was the 1980s generation, the 1990s generation, there was that gap between then and there where the bronies themselves were, it wasn't as good as a series. But the thing is that bronies exist specifically because of the series, whereas with furries, we exist because we exist through one another. We create those series. Yeah, go.
Oh yeah, I mean, like I think that's really, exactly what sets us apart from every other fandom-oriented community out there. You hit the nail on the head. We are a community that are fans of each other. We're not based in corporate media. We are not really based off of any like one series. It's not like the Star Trek fandom that when like whatever current Star Trek series ends, the population drifts off. And I think that that's really intrinsic to our longevity as a community. I mean, that's why we've seen people who've literally been in it since the 70s, still a part of the fandom today.
It's not to say that the occasional corporate bone being thrown our way is not accepted or glommed onto. If you take, like, how many people cite early Disney as their inspiration for getting into the fandom or looking up the fandom in the first place, kind of stuff.
I mean, like, we've had very recent controversies in respect to the Brazil Fur Fest, for instance, connecting with
Converse.
Yeah. And but those are all integral parts. That if and like, I don't know, I would agree that if a convention wants to be able to, see itself as a viable, monetary or funding sort of strategy that involves a larger company, then they can do the thing that they need to do. And I don't think that things like that shouldn't be looked down upon, especially if the connection with, say, Converse isn't going to harm the fandom overall. That Converse is going to sit down and say, okay, now we own furries. Like, that would be preposterous. In fact, if that were the case, the contract with Converse may most probably would have never happened. And it's the fact of the matter. Yeah? Go.
Well, it couldn't happen, right? Yeah. I mean, like, furry is not a singular thing. It's a multitude of ideas formed into one community. So I mean, like, yeah, you couldn't even sell out the fandom even if you wanted to.
Yeah.
Like, no contract could hold that. Yeah.
Sure. Like, even in our film, we try to explain like what the furry fandom can be, but like to check every box would be impossible. Like, it means so much to so many different people. Yeah. So we're really kind of trying to get like the ballpark understanding of what like brings us all together. Because my participation is going to be different from yours. Like, I'm not a fursuiter. Like, that's never been really like that important to me. But I'm just as much a furry as the next person who identifies as such, because I identify as such.
I mean, that has always been sort of the sort of idea, like this difference between a lifer or a person who's an RPer or anything like that. All of those things, they're all valid.
Sure, and frankly, I think when we run into the most problems in our community is the moment we try to like draw a line in the sand and then gatekeep around that.
Yeah. Do you think sorry.
The more we try to define it, the more we create a feeling of exclusion for those who don't quite fit the definition.
Yeah.
And I think our fandom is kind of based around this idea of being open, accepting. provided that people's differences are not harmful to others.
Exactly that. That's probably something that I want to get down to as well, because that does sort of shift us towards the idea of, and it's not a recent thing. It's been around since like at least the early 2000s. When it comes to like say Nazi imagery and furries being drawn as such, it's difficult to be able to, and I mean this might be coming from like admin channels, things like that. So I mean obviously you can go onto Telegram and you'll be inundated with groups that involve themselves with the furry fandom, public, private, safe for work, not safe for work. But there seems to be I think almost a general standard that certain people, because of their connections, tend to be not as well liked within the furry fandom itself. So we could also talk about the idea of like, do we think that the fandom should be allowed to self-police, or whether there should be a sort of a general set of rules, like no Nazis, or no of this particular group of people, or no, like do we do the same thing that say the LGBT community would do for itself?
I mean, I think we should.
Yeah.
If that's what you're asking, I mean, like we
I
don't want
guess
to. Was it?
sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
You go first.
We don't want to take away from the individual's experience. And I think really what we have to address here is when one individual chooses to do something that affects the experience of a lot of individuals, right? Take, for example, people propagating a hate message, Nazi furs, whatever, you want to throw out there. Those individuals are now impacting the well-being of the other members of the community. And that's why we do need to police the community in some sense. I'm not saying that we should put up barriers of entry and completely exclude, but I mean, people need to understand that what they're doing, their actions have an effect on other people's lives. Chip and I, before all this, dealt with a very rough situation with a group of individuals here in Colorado that had taken down our convention. We do talk about that in the film, actually. They had basically shut down every single public event that we had because they were walking around with their little swastikas and stuff. They had, sorry, it's hard to talk about a little bit, but, like we'd received death threats from them personally. Like, that's not okay. That should never be okay. That shouldn't be a part of our community. I don't think for 1 minute, that this is like a point of even really politics. I mean, like we're talking about something that has historically been viewed as bad, right? And that continues to be that way with the individuals and the way they choose to portray it and push it and like try and harm others. So yeah, absolutely. We should keep those individuals out of the fandom.
Yeah, like I was just gonna say, like I'm less interested in like the specific semantics and labeling of like individuals and groups and things. It's more of like behavior. Like if you're doing something that's harmful, that's destructive, that limits the ability of others to enjoy themselves and feel that they're able to be safe. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we should be watching out for. I don't think necessarily we have to like put like a specific like this group is allowed, this group isn't. It's more of just, I don't know, we have to like be mindful of like things that are healthy for the community.
I personally think that to a large degree we do sort of self-police, purely in the sense that like I wouldn't say like the furry fandom itself has a sort of a strong shared ideology in the sense of we are incredibly accommodating to others, and anyone who comes in with a message of exclusion or hate or anything like that immediately like trips a switch somewhere in the majority of the furry fandom's collective consciousness says this is not okay, and therefore we sort of drive them out. I mean, the idea, no one sort of stuck a flag in the, no official body stuck a flag in the ground and said, like, no Nazi furs except for Eurofurence with the Nazi furs fuck off thing. But
well, I mean, if you're subscribing to that ideology and actively acting on it, then I would probably want to, take some action against that as well. But you don't necessarily. I guess what I'm saying is that, like, not everyone who is like toxic to the community is going to, like, openly, like, announce that they're part of, like, the neo-Nazi party or what have you. So it's really more about just identifying, like, what I think is productive and harmful, and trying to build the safest and most productive community around that.
It's like it's that entire idea. Like, you look at what's it? You as far as, say, when students or choose to wear out and people out, choose, I guess, or anything like that. Those, it's weird. On one hand, we're trying to make open, safe spaces, but on the other hand, we're also, like, there are certain elements of the furry fandom that would try to stifle, things like sexual expression, for instance. And when it comes to sexual expression, like, look no further than, the furry fandom, in the way that we're open about, both being comfortable within our own skin as well as being comfortable within, a suit, for instance, that we then represent as our skin. That's something that I think that many communities should be able to sort of sit down and go, yeah, no, I can get that. Like, if you don't feel comfortable with your present self, change it. Be healthy. Be happy with who you are. And, like, I've found groups within, like, when it comes to, say, trans rights and things like that, look no further than the furry fandom for it's almost an outpouring of positivity around that. And that's something that you're not going to find in places like anime conventions. You're not going to find that kind of camaraderie in, brony conventions, for instance. That's something that could be said about the fandom as a whole, and it's something that I'm hoping that your documentary, like, is also going to be looking at. That this, out of all of the places that we're at, has literally I mean, like, what is it? If we're looking for LGBT things, or if we're looking at current marches, for instance, what is it, Mormons? No, not the Mormons.
Mormons.
No, not Mormons. The Amish have been openly accepted into things like BLM movements. Like, the Amish have literally sat down and said, no, Black Lives Matter. We look at things like that where there are fringe groups, and furry is very much still a fringe group, that are saying things that should be universally accepted in senses. Like, again, BLM. The furry fandom, at least at this point, has definitely, like, tacked towards that kind of ideology. People matter, but at this point, Black Lives Matter. We understand that kind of differentiation. Carry on, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think I wanted to talk a little bit about something that you brought up, and then I'll actually kind of jump into kind of like the BLM stuff too. So, about, like, sex and sexuality, I think, and I'm pretty sure, Ash, you'd agree on this, that was the hardest thing for us to really kind of coalesce into a simple yet digestible idea, so people could really understand and appreciate that openness that our community has around the subject. Because I think it's by far the most misunderstood aspect of furry. Like, people will be like, "Oh, it's just a kink thing, isn't it? You know, that's what this is all about." It isn't. It's just a community that happens to be more open to talking about these different forms of expression. And really, that's the possibly the most progressive view I've seen on sexuality is from furries, in that we're able to address it as an element of our lives, but being able to talk about it and express it too is a part of that, right? So you need to have that ability to just look at it for what it is, you know?
Yeah, it was
That's
kind
just
of like what I was
it's
saying
just
earlier
a part of
about
life.
how,
Yeah.
yeah, like your persona is like is a kind of a conduit to who you are, and if your sexuality is important to you, it's something that you can use to kind of like, you know, express that component of your identity. And if other people are accepting of it, then it's like, oh, well, maybe I can come out to this group for real and start to like talk to them. And I mean, you know, as a gay person, like I found a lot of solidarity in the community. The sense of like, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not, you know, a freak, or it's not weird. Like I can actually have conversations now, with people who understand. And so like that was like an unexpected perk of finding this community. You know, I fell into it because of like the fun animal characters, and I liked that idea of like, oh, if you could be an animal, what could you be? But I found a lot more, and to be that is why I stayed in the fandom, and I think that's why you see people in their like 60s or whatever in the community still today, because like the bonds that you create here really last, and it gives you a chance to be yourself in a way that you don't normally get to express yourself on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. I mean, like it's life changing really when you find a community that supports you. I mean, in some ways, I feel like it almost takes the place of like a religion for some people. You know, like for a long time, Christianity and like churches were like a social space where people gathered in addition to doing like everything else that they did. But like, I think in modern society, those spaces are less available to us. Um, especially folks in the LGBT community, and this just happened to be one of them. Do you want to? So Ash, do you want to talk a little bit about Black Lives Matter with me too?
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, because you brought it up, and I think that there is an interesting component to all this that I've personally kind of found a little bit frustrating with the fandom. It's that while like generally speaking, we are over I'd say the large majority of us are pretty accepting individuals. I mean, you do see pushback in the fandom too. I mean, I for one noticed, especially when the Black Lives Matter movement started to rise up with our community, there was individuals who were pushing back really hard against it too. And like I think that that's one of those kind of learning moments for our community where we need to kind of look and realize that we are all minorities. We need to stand together. It doesn't matter, like who you are. We need to help the voices, elevate the voices that need to be heard. And in this instance, and in this case right now in our country, that's Black Lives Matter movement. And
Absolutely.
it's just it was shocking to me, honestly.
Yeah. I don't know like why the community would have any sense of wavering about which side to fall on. Like like all lives matter, obviously, but right now we have to focus on those who are not being treated with equality. And I think it's a moment to check privilege. I think it's a moment to not double down when you get called out, and consider alternate perspectives and say like, maybe there's maybe some like the tensions I'm feeling are just me not realizing that my privilege is like getting in the way of me understanding the situation. I think it's about listening and not putting your own voice into to define what's happening from when others are trying to explain, and then like being an active and supportive ally whenever you can, and asking how you can help instead of just assuming that the things that you need to do are the best for everyone.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
I mean, go.
Mhm.
No. Go
I was gonna say that the issues also existed in our community with native furries as
Yes.
well. I mean, this issue is kind of an issue that's prevalent in the fandom, in that, I mean, I don't know statistically if this is accurate, but I believe that a lot of the community tends to fall under the gay white male kind of stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
Which means it's very easy for individuals to miss that, maybe some of the things that they're doing aren't quite right, and aren't respectful of others' identities, beliefs, and or cultures.
Yeah.
So
Go.
yeah, you can go. Yeah.
No, I mean, like, and even when we're talking about like people who, and that's one of the other things, and I think that it's definitely something that the fandom does a lot more readily than say other groups. I mean, if we're looking
Mhm.
at the trans community, for instance, there was a person who, if I'm not mistaken, this is I'm not sure if we should edit this out at some point or not, but I'm going to go with it. There was a person who used to, and I think they were a porn star. The Mangina Man was his name.
What?
Yeah.
Okay. Continue.
So
Continue.
Go on.
transition. I'm not. I actually can't remember if it was F to M or M to F, but definitely a porn star. And I know that the only reason why I know about this person is because back in the early or like mid 2000s, I had a friend of mine who was busy transitioning themselves, and they showed me like, hey, look at this. This is something that I want to be able to do. And I was like, wow, that actually seems quite interesting. Now, 20 years down the line, that same person is being sort of lambasted for stating particular things about trans rights that are different to the way that we used to understand them back then. Again, they called themselves the Mangina Man. That was acceptable back then.
That is quite a fascinating quite a fascinating name. It's interesting. I will say this. So like this is my own personal experience,
Yeah.
and like this is me just kind of sharing a little bit about my past. When I transitioned in the fandom, one would think that the LGBT community would be the most accepting and most supportive of that experience, because you're finding yourself, you're coming out, you're like you're being you.
Yeah.
I unfortunately received almost all the pushback that I got from within our own community. Um, People just didn't understand what it was to be trans, and I think it's improved quite a bit since then, because I was painfully public in some instances about sharing my experiences and allowing that vulnerability to help push some of that change. But I it's a difficult thing. I mean, like, not everybody is going to understand the complexities of these interpersonal journeys that we all have to kind of go on. And when, like, the collective knowledge of the group is one way, which, by the way, I would have considered myself to be a gay man before I transitioned. My husband and I had been married for 5 years at that point. And I'll fully admit it, I didn't completely understand what it was to be trans until I really started to have to accept myself and my own identity. I think a lot of people go through that, and I think a lot of the pushback ultimately was actually tied to the fact that by questioning my own identity, it forced others around me to question their identities as well. And sometimes you find stuff that you're not quite happy with, or that confuses you. And sometimes when that happens, you lash out. I don't think that's okay, but like that's a story for another day.
well, also one of the problems with that is like the immediacy that social media allows us to voice those opinions, and that kind of becomes like the narrative of like our identity and who we are. So sometimes we don't all give one another the ability to well, to listen or to grow over time. Not to say that, not to defend the people who did those things to you, but
Oh yes.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, I agree with what you're saying though too. Like this is a you know, like a learning opportunity more than anything else. So I'm a sense
Well,
apologize too. I mean, it's worth saying that. I think that through experience comes knowledge.
Well, exactly. I mean, like I've been called out in the process of like trying to support the BLM movement for moments of acting on my own privilege, not realizing it, and I think it's important to like pay attention and not get defensive and be like, oh well, I'm just trying to, you know, and because that doesn't actually like help the problem. And yeah, I guess I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm just realizing that I'm the white male demographic, so I'm all kinds of like guilty and worried about that right now.
Don't
But
feel guilty, Ash.
no, I mean the idea is to like, you know, be an accepting person, because like I don't know, it's the golden rule, like treat others the way that you would want to be treated.
Yeah.
Don't be a dick.
The narrative could have very easily have been written the other way around, and we could be on the other side of things. So like, in the way our, you know, the U.S. is going, who knows? Maybe LGBT people are in danger of being on the other side of things again. So we should probably show our support for the people that we want to be there for us, because that's how being a human works.
And like getting in on that, I mean, we're looking at the weirdest who have stood with furry for whatever reasons. I mean, you're looking at the the clown posse, for instance. Is it
ICP?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still don't know what ICP actually does aside from, you know, run around in makeup.
Pretty much that.
Like but the thing is that it's about being, I think, and maybe when we're looking at the fandom, and I'm hoping that this might sort of be, I'm hoping that one of the messages that does come out from your documentary about is this idea that it's okay to be different. And I think that's what the fandom does so very, very well. It's okay to be different. It's okay to be a green wolf on the internet. It's okay to be, you know, a person dressed as a demo man, for instance, that we can accept ourselves within the skins that we choose. And I think that's also terrifyingly important. That so long as it's not harmful to someone else, that
Absolutely.
that we get to choose who we want to be.
Yeah, I've often talked about how kind of the so like the internet and by proxy personas kind of build this veil of anonymity that allows us to really experiment and kind of look inside ourselves. Same thing with fursuits. You know, you put on a fursuit, and sometimes by putting on a fursuit, it forces you to look inwardly and find the truest elements of self, and then you begin to project those outwardly. Because when you remove like when you remove your own kind of like facade, you lose, you know, like people can't see your face, people can't see your body, you know, you're in something different and you're performing, and they don't know who's in that. So it kind of like brings out who you are at the core. It's really cool. It's amazing.
Yeah, and those are things that I would love to have, like 300,000 videos and interviews and things like this out there. It's the same thing for conventions, for instance. I mean, like currently, South Africa is the only convention in South Africa, but like I would love for there to be 10, 20, one for every damn city that we have. It doesn't matter if there are 5 people at one of these meets, or if there are 250, or if there's 3,000 or 10,000. That idea of of community is something that's very important, and that's something that at least we're going to be able to see with your documentary, that like there's that focus on what the fandom is about, why the fandom exists the way that it does, and how it's actually created such kind of longevity. Those are things that people would be interested in. That how can a fandom that is both divided on some of the strangest lines that we could possibly find still so, gelled together?
Yeah, I hope people take that away from it. Like going into this film, one of our goals was to make it approachable for non-furry audiences, because we want them to be able to like take away those exact points that you're hitting on right now. We want this to be the kind of thing that a furry can like show to their parents and be like, hey, this is like why I got into this thing. Look at like the passion on display. Look at how, because to at the end of the day, it's like these like unifying things that kind of like bring us together. This like sense of this interest in like animal characters, this interest in creativity and art, of expression, of identity, of community. So we try to pull those elements into the film when we explore the community.
Yeah, and to kind of add to that, I mean, like, we want to show people this amazing community that we have. I mean, where else can you be a professional artist now, living off of commissions? I mean, where else in the world is there a community that's literally run and driven by the artists within it? It's such a unique place. It's like its own little utopia as far as what it is as a kind of overbearing concept, and I think it's amazing, and I want people to see that. I want people to know it for something more than what whoever like shocking content YouTuber out there is trying to display about the fandom. I want people to see it for what it actually is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great message to have. It's something that we definitely need more of. And so what I do want to do right now, obviously, is we can talk about closing dates or sort of showing dates, things like that. And if you have any sort of things that you want to plug beyond the work that you do, I see that we're just running, I think, a little bit over time now. I'm not sure. Yeah, so if you have anything you want to talk about right now, anything that you want to plug beyond just this, as well as this, dates, things like that, more than happy to sort of give that space for it.
Okay.
Yeah, let's talk about a premiere.
Yeah.
Do you want me to go for that, Ash?
You go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So the Fandom, the feature film, will be premiering on YouTube July 3rd. We haven't set the start time for the premiere just yet because we're trying to figure out what the best time will be for everybody. We want as many folks to be able to enjoy it at the same time as possible. After that point, it will still be available on my channel, free to stream. There's going to be ads on it there, but you can, if you don't want the ads, you can go to Amazon Prime after July 3rd and watch the film there. Or you can purchase the film off our website, which is, I think, store.thefandomfilm.com. And we'll have like digital downloads and Blu-rays available for people to do with what they please. Trying to think if there's something. Oh yes, the reason we are premiering on YouTube is because of COVID-19. Yes, the wonderful pandemic that's going on right now affected all the film festivals that would usually be going on around this time. Because of that, we are actually having to do this digital premiere. Anything anybody can do to get out the word, to help us get this film in front of as many eyes as possible would be wonderful. I'll be eternally grateful. Just help us out if you can. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I got.
That's pretty much it. I think you summed it up quite well.
Yay!
Okay. And then, like, personal projects, anything that you're working on beyond this? I know that obviously your YouTube channel exists. I didn't do enough, what's the word, work on Ash. Is there anything that you'd like to plug for yourself? This is Ash Eagle.
Oh, well, I think I can say at this stage, you should anticipate a season 2 of the Fandom series coming out in the sometime future. Once we get all the bells and whistles finished on this one, at least. And once that's out in the world, we'll be working on season 2. And I'm also I work professionally as an independent filmmaker and an editor. So I've got a couple other projects in the wings as well.
All right.
But nothing I can really talk about in too much depth at this point.
Yeah, fair enough. But yeah, look, thank you very much for taking the opportunity to join us, and we really do appreciate you two taking out some time for us, and especially since we're going to be airing this this Sunday at our own little sort of home down internet convention thing. It's very difficult to talk about because it feels like it's a mess. More because of the fact that it's because of COVID that this is pretty much all we can do. Many conventions are just shut down right now, and we just need to be able to find different ways of creating community. And being able to talk about this, being able to talk about positivity within the fandom, that it definitely is. It's awesome, and we thank you very much for all the kind of work that you're putting into this, not just in respect to the film, but also in respect to the presences that Ash, you obviously have online as well. This is Coyote, and
Yay!
yeah, because I mean, like I've been a big fan of your YouTube channel, for instance, and the sort of.
Oh,
I
good
think
God, I'm sorry.
No worries. We also follow your what's the word? Your Twitter page, and there's that amount of positivity that we definitely need more of. But it's also we're mixed in with positivity as well as real life stories, real life sort of events that are happening around us. Like again, BLM. For that same matter, everybody within the fandom who are marginalized, but also marginalized twice, thrice, sometimes even quadruple marginalized. And we give, and I think is important. Documentary people, yourselves, that's something that we can appreciate. We appreciate the idea that people have voices and that we're able to do that for the fandom at large. And we thank you for that.
Oh, I thank y'all for helping.
Yeah, what you're doing is very, very important, and like the fandom's done so much for us, so it's just our way of giving back.
Anything to help signal boost.
Yeah. So I mean, and again, if you have any media that you want to send our way that we can just like throw out for the next 2, 3, 5, 20 weeks, we love reposting things. It feels like beyond the idea that we're talking on Sundays, they're like, oh yeah, no, here these people exist. Just like randomly throw them out there. But yes,
I'll throw together some files for y'all that I'll put in the folder with this audio file.
Awesome.
Sweet.
Oh, I've been recording one as well, actually. So let me know who I should send that to.
That'll be Scratch, I think.
Okay.
All right, sweet. Speaking of what's his name? Plugging people. We were talking about digging up positivity. I remember it's Tabo Meerkat.
Tabo Meerkat, yeah.
Yeah. Just complete segue. Complete segue.
I'll look him up.
Yeah, actually, Tabo's amazing. Like, they've also been around for like donkey's years. It's little things like that. Positivity is definitely the best way to go about things, and the way that we admire it from your side and from like every other person who's been doing it like this. This is great. But yeah, thank you for joining us. We really do appreciate being able to speak with you about this and being able to get a bit more sort of personal on things. And I know that that's kind of one of the things that South Africa tends to do quite often is that it's one of the reasons why we have as long times for the interviews that we do. it's important to be able to understand the people behind the creations that they make as well, because that's important to us. So,
Well, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I super appreciate it. Thank you for having us on.
It was our absolute pleasure. Cool. Well, then we shall. I mean, after this, most likely Ivy will resume with music.
Yeah, probably. I'm not even sure if we should be plugging that right now, but that's kind of where this will be going. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, see you guys next time. Cheers.